this unit here, optimize customer data with standard and custom objects. And now we're going to move into this unit here. It says create object relationships. Yeah. So as we usually do it, first thing that we look at is what are the learning objectives of the unit. Okay, so the learning objectives of this specific unit are to be able to define the different types of relationships, object relationships, and their typical use cases, right? And then you should be able to create and modify a lookup relationship. You should be able to create and modify a master detailed relationship, right? At this point, we don't have no idea what a lookup relationship is. We have no idea what a master detailed relationship is. In fact, we don't even have any solid definition of what relationship is at this point. Okay. So what are object relationships? Right. Remember that in the previous unit, we have already defined what an object is, right? We also went into what the different types of objects are that we get, standard and custom, right? But now, just as a refresher, when we look at objects, what do you think an object is, right? In reality, an object is a thing, right? Everything is an object, right? I'm sitting here, I'm looking at my laptop. It's a thing, it's an object, right? And we may want to store on Salesforce information about this laptop, right? And we create a container for that information, and this container is called an object, right? An object is a container of many related types of things, all right, where we store information about things. So if we have an object called a laptop, then in that object, we are able to store information about different laptops. Okay, and those would be records. Okay, once we do store information in that object, that information will be called records. All right. So in Salesforce, we create containers to store information about things, and these containers are called objects. All right. As with normal life, objects have relationships. Okay? If I'm going to store information about this laptop, um, I might also want to store information about its manufacturer. The laptop that I have here is a Dell laptop, right? And I might have to store information in my Salesforce instance about manufacturers, right? In which case, I'm going to create a table called manufacturers, and I will store information, different types of information about a manufacturer. I'll store information about the name, obviously, of the manufacturer. I'll store information about where they are based, their address. I'll store different types of information, right, about this manufacturer. Then there'll be a list of manufacturers which is stored in this manufacturer object, right? And then I can relate a manufacturer with a laptop, right? And create a relationship. And Salesforce allows us to create these relationships between objects. Okay, so a relationship, in essence, is a utility in Salesforce that allows you to clearly state that the one object has a relationship with the other. Okay, so the example being made here is an account, um, which is a business. Okay, um, it accounts as a business that becomes a client to us. Okay, so if we are saying we have an account, we are saying in essence that um, we have another business that is a client to us. Okay, then in this other business, there are employees, right, that work in that business, and we may have gotten the business from this account through one of their employees. Okay, we may have met um, the CEO or a COO or some manager, right? Um, and this was the person who was instrumental in our effort to bring this account on board. So this person in Salesforce, we refer to them as a contact, right? Contact. So a contact to the account, right? Meaning that um, there is a relationship between the account and the contact. Then we have facilities to enforce this relationship. Okay, so that's the example there. And this is also it's a standard type of relationship that exists between the account and the object, meaning that Salesforce creates it already. We don't need to create it ourselves, right? Because remember, standard objects, right? And the relationship between them is already in place, right? We don't have to create it ourselves. Okay, and we can build custom relationships, obviously, ourselves. Okay, and we are going to look at the two main types of relationships that you find in Salesforce. Okay, so the first type of relationship is the lookup relationship. Um, so this is a type of relationship that exists between two independent um, objects, right? Um, independent, what do I mean? I mean that the one object or both objects, they can exist independently, right? And a relationship can be formed at any point in time when it's needed. Let me make an example. So we've been following a theme of a company that sells properties, right? So in in this scenario of a company that sells properties, we'll have properties in the company's database, right? Yeah. We'll also have an object for buyers, property buyers, right? Um, but they will, or rather, not property buyers, but we'll also have a um, an object for um, clients, right? So clients, these are people who want to buy properties, right? So in this instance, a property exists on its own, a client exists on its own, right? But at some point, a client may buy a property, okay? They may buy a property, at which point we need to relate um, the property to that client because now it's theirs, right? So in that kind of situation where these two objects can exist independently, but we also want to create a facility that at some point there can be an actual relationship. We use this lookup type of relationship to model that. Okay, and with lookup relationships, each object will have its own tab on Salesforce, right? Um, and there are different types of lookup relationships. You can find a one-to-one relationship. This is the kind of relationship where only one um, record of the one object can also just be related to only one object of the other, or one record of the other. So what I mean in this case is um, only one buyer. So a house can only belong to one buyer, right? You can't have many people buying the same house, and we say that's the case because it's a conflict, right? Who gets the house? And this is not obviously getting into maybe investors who invest and they buy a property together. Let's just keep it simple and say um, only one buyer can buy a house. Only a property can only belong to one buyer or one client. Okay, so in that case, we're using a one-to-one relationship, but to model that situation. We can have a one-to-many, right? Um, this is the kind of relationship. I know it may not be in line with what the examples that they give here, but a a salesperson can have many properties that they sell, right? And this is the kind of relationship that we would deem as a one-to-many. So one seller has many properties that they're selling, right? And then we can have also a many-to-many type of relationship, right? And this type of relationship is um, an example that we can make is a um, a let's see, maybe it's going to require us to move away from this property scenario. I could share an example when I find one, but a typical many-to-many relationship would be in a student or student setting. A student can have many courses that they take or many modules that they take, right? And then a module can also be taken by many students, right? This is the kind of situation where we have a many-to-many relationship. Right? Student can have many courses or modules. A module can be taken by many students. Right? That is a many-to-many relationship. Okay. The other main type of relationship called a master detail relationship. And in this relationship, it's a type of relationship where the one object cannot exist without the other, right? So there's two objects involved here. Um, there's the detail object, which cannot exist without the master object. Okay. Um, and they make an example here, um, a property and offers, right? So let's imagine that the property obviously is an object, and there's an object called offer as well, right? Where we store information about offers, right? So when an offer is made, right, an offer is made for a specific property, right? And it does not make sense for an offer to to be recorded in the system, and it doesn't point to any property. So the existence of this depends on this. All right. Therefore, should we delete a property, we also delete all of the offers that were pointing to this property, because otherwise these offers point to something that's non-existent, right? So that's a type of relationship that is create a relationship, create a link between two objects, right? But this is a much stronger link because the one object cannot exist without the other. All right. Another example that I would make would be a customer transaction relationship, right? Where we have in our system customers, and then we have another object called transactions, right? It does not make sense for us to have a transaction that belongs to no customer, right? The transaction must have been made by a customer, right? Even the example that I made about the laptop and a manufacturer is also a master detail relationship, because there is no laptop that was not, or that does not belong to a manufacturer that just appeared from nowhere, right? The laptop is there because it was manufactured, right? So yeah, another thing about the master detail relationship is that the master object controls the visibility of the detail object, right? If the security settings on the master object are such that a certain profile cannot view this object, then that the same will apply to the detail object, right? If as a cleaner in this company, I cannot view properties when I open Salesforce, it means I'll also not be able to view the offers made on these properties. So the master controls the visibility or the security settings of the detail. All right. And then, like I said, if you delete the master, the detail also gets deleted. Okay. Uh, and then the third type of relationship, which they make reference to here, is um, a hierarchical relationship. Okay. And this is a relationship where um, it's also called a self relationship, because you relate objects of the same type, right? So here they say hierarchical relationships can be created amongst users. So a user is an object, right? Um, but I have seen instances where we create a hierarchical relationship in uh, in other objects as well. So with users, you can create a relationship such that um, a, an employee has a manager works maybe under an executive, you know, and this is now relating users. Okay, um, but we can also have a relationship, a hierarchical relationship between accounts, right? Because sometimes we have a parent company that has subsidiaries, right? And a subsidiary may have other subsidiaries. So there's a hierarchy there, right? So this is the third type of relationship called the hierarchical relationship, but it can also be called a self relationship, right? It just depends um, on where you come from, right? Okay, and that's it about relationships. So let's look at the objectives again. Um, are we able to define the different types of object relationships and their typical use cases? Yes, we know that now there's a lookup relationship and there's a master detail relationship. We know that For a situation where the one object cannot exist without the other, we use master detail relationships. And for the situation where the two objects can exist independently, we use a lookup relationship. Okay. We're able to create or modify a lookup relationship, create or modify a master detail relationship. That is the exercise here. Right. So let's have a look. Let's duplicate. So what I want to do, let me open a playground. So we're going to follow the instructions there to create. So we're going to first create the custom object, and then I guess we're going to add the relationship later. Okay, so create the custom object. The custom object is going to be favorite, right? So as we've uh, already done in the previous unit, we know that in order to create an object, you have to come to settings or setup, then come to object manager. I'm going to click on create custom object. And I'm just going to copy the labels here. Paste. Yeah, it's going to be favorites. Object name is favorite. And I always just click on these to make sure that I can have flexibility. And I'm going to add a new custom tab because that's what they instruct us to do. Yeah, so we do have to do that. And remember, we do that just so that we have access to this object via the tabs, right? So we have a tab for this object. That's the reason why we do this. Why we click on that. And I'm going to save. And it's going to launch the tabs wizard. All I have to do here is actually just click on an icon that will be used on the tab. So favorite, I'll just click on anything. Okay. And then we leave the default security settings. We leave this on default as well. And we're done creating the object, right? So now on this object, we're going to create a lookup relationship, right? And this is how we create a relationship now. So we go to build and relationships. We choose a lookup relationship and click next. Okay. And then for related to, we choose contact. Okay. So we're creating a relationship in the contact and the favorite object. Right. So from setup, click on relationship. Next, choose contact. For the purposes of greenhouse context, represent potential buyers. Okay. So the buyer will favorite a property. Right. They'll favor a property. Okay. Click next, next. and create a master detail relationship. Now, second, okay. So let's start doing this one first. So we come to fields and relationships, right? And we're going to create a new field, right? And this field is the one that we use to model the relationship. Okay. So we select lookup relationship as a type of field, and we're going to say it's related to a contact. And then next, 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 and then save. Okay, so now we have a lookup relationship between the favorite object and a contact. Okay. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a second relationship on the favorite, and this is going to relate the favorite to a property. Okay, so master detail. Remember, um, in this situation, what's going to be the master, what's going to be the detail, right? Um, the property will be the master, right? And then the favorite would be the detail. Okay, so you cannot favorite a non-existent property. Right? Favorite is more like what we have in social media, right? Where you like something, and when you like something, a record is created on that platform, and this record will say um, so and so liked this thing, right? Or liked this post. But in our case, we are liking properties, right? And um, I cannot like something that does not exist, right? Therefore, the like depends on what is being liked. In this case, you cannot like a non-existent property. So the property is a master to the like in this situation, right? Because the like is meaningless without the property, right? So that's the kind of thing that we have here. So we're going to create a master detail relationship between the property and the like, which is the favorite. Okay, so we're going to come into relationships again, say new, then we're going to go from relationship. Next, T, next, 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 and say a detailed type of relationship between the favorite and the property. Okay. Hmm. Okay, so now we're going to create the record, I guess, so that we can see how it looks. Okay. So one thing to note, we created two fields and they are custom fields. And you can see by the formatting of the API names. Okay, the one is the lookup, the detail, right? And we know um, the reason, right? As I've just explained, the reason why we are using the different types of relationships. So now let's look at a favorite. Right? So if we're going to create a record for a favorite, right, we're going to add a name for this favorite. Usually, in this type of setting, you wouldn't really need to add the name, right? Or the name is not very significant, but you know, obviously that name is a standard field that you find on any object. So I'll just say like, right? And then with these types of relationship fields, um, you don't add anything that's non-existent, right? So as information here. So you'll notice that when we um, select this field here, we'll already have suggestions, right, of its records. Okay, so I'll just select this as a contact, and as a property, we only have one property. So we're going to select that property. So what does this say? This says that Gonzalez liked the West Elm property. Okay, so we have created um, an actual scenario where we use both relationships. And yeah, I think that's where we're going to end the recording.